Hello everyone, welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, the battle between Rimuru and Ivarage officially began. Although Seal had assessed Ivarage's existence points as exceeding the trillion level, Rimuru didn't actually feel that his opponent was overwhelmingly powerful in direct combat. On the other hand, Ivarage clearly sensed the danger of defeat and finally unleashed her true strength, revealing her gigantic form. During that exchange, Seal proposed that Rimuru-sama use True Dragon nucleation, and this time, Rimuru gained the support of 3 true dragons, at the very pinnacle of the world all at once. In this episode, Ivarage named herself Luvelrage, further boosting her combat power. But no matter how Luvelrage attacked, Remuru was still able to respond calmly. That outcome was more or less expected. The gap between them was simply too vast. However, driven by pure malice, Luvelrage made a move that even Remuru hadn't anticipated. And this time, Shion would be the one to turn the tide. So, let's get started. Holding the blade Elpis, now embedded with 3 true dragon cores, Rimuru felt his spirits soar. But he also clearly understood just how dangerous this battle was. To prevent the aftermath from harming anyone else, he made a request to Guy, asking him to protect the others. It was the first time Rimuru had ever seen worry on Guy's face, probably because Velzard was inside the sword. Guy even double-checked several times to make sure Rimuru really didn't need reinforcements. Rimuru insisted he had it covered and warned everyone to stay alert. To be honest, even he didn't know how destructive this sword truly was. He only knew it was at least as powerful as Milim's full-force Dragonova, if not stronger. Hearing that, Milim clenched her teeth in frustration, clearly unwilling to admit that someone might outgun her. But she still accepted the task of assisting with defense. Rimuru then noticed the small dragon Gaia being held in Milim's arms. Before Milim could explain, Ramirez jumped in and introduced Gaia herself. Gaia could act even within the stopped world, and could also gather everyone's power to deploy a maximum barrier. Ramirez proudly added that Gaia was in existence on par with the true dragons, functioning on principles equivalent to true dragon magic and primitive magic. The effect was absolute defense, ignoring time and space, deployable anytime, anywhere. Remuru could only call that insanely impressive. This was exactly the kind of defensive authority he needed right now, something that would let him go all out without any worries. With Gaia's barrier in place, everyone began offering Rimuru their trust and encouragement. Guy said he'd leave taking down Ivarage entirely to Rimuru. Milim told him not to lose, no matter what. Rimuru, seizing the moment, hyped himself up like a fighter before a match, boldly declaring that with Veldora and the Big Sisters backing him, losing wasn't going to be easy at all. Diablo, Testarossa, and the others had absolute faith in Rimuru-sama's victory, so much so that the concept of losing didn't even exist to them. Benimaru just wanted this wrapped up quickly so he could get back to Tempest and continue his increased sweetness plan and entertainment facility construction. Zegion, meanwhile, wished to return to training, determined to grow stronger so that Rimuru-sama would never have to step in personally again. Those words reminded Rimuru of how precious everyday life truly was, and to protect that life, Ivarage had to die. Just as the mood settled, Feldway pushed his way forward. He made a solemn request to Rimuru-sama, asking his god to avenge his former lord, Veldanava-sama. Rimuru was completely stunned. Since when had he become Feldway's god? He seriously wondered if Feldway had finally lost it. Diablo, as always, immediately bristled at the sight of Feldway and angrily accused him of being shameless, worshipping Rimuru-sama without permission and then daring to make demands. Ultima fully backed Diablo up. Carrera thought Feldway was being reckless, though she could understand the urge to worship Rimuru-sama. Testarossa continued her role as the voice of balance. On the angel side, Cornu tried to support Feldway, but Obera and Zalario jumped in to stop things from escalating. Eventually, Dino stepped in to mediate, insisting that they resolve the crisis first and argue later. With that, everyone united to help maintain the barrier. The last person to stand before Remuru was Chloe, her expression heavy. Although this was the first time things had progressed so smoothly, and she hadn't had to rewind time even once, her inability to see the future left her uneasy. To honor Chloe's countless loops, Rimuru jokingly comforted her by quoting Diablo, saying that according to him, Rimuru-sama losing was simply impossible. This time, Rimuru didn't burden himself with pressure. He drew strength from everyone's words. At that moment, whether friends or former enemies, all eyes were on him alone. To answer that weight of expectation, Rimuru turned his back to them, casually raised one hand, and the final battle began. Before engaging, Rimuru first confirmed the safety of everyone frozen on the ground. In the stopped world, the binding force of matter, defensive strength, was effectively zero. Everything shattered at the slightest touch. To prevent collateral damage, absolute preparation was required. Rimuru channeled power through his sword and called upon Velzard. The dragon core embedded in Elpis flared brilliantly as Velzard activated her authority, Fixation. Borrowing Rimuru's power, the icy constructs protecting the heroes were reinforced from mere ice statues into a state of complete fixation, strong enough to withstand the shockwaves of a god-level battle. At last, Rimuru could fight without holding anything back. Meanwhile, Ivarage completed her full transformation and fully established her sense of self. She revealed her completely aberrant true form, a gigantic body stretching over 100 meters in length. Structurally, her upper body was humanoid with 3 pairs of arms, while her lower body took the shape of a 6-legged wolf. Her head was draconic, crowned with a mane of flame-like hair running from her forehead to the back of her skull. On her back grew 3 pairs of wings, vast, eagle-like wings emerging from a humanoid back. Her entire body was densely covered in dragon scales. On the dragon's forehead was a human face, bearing traits of both Lucia and Veldanava, making its gender impossible to discern. And her wolf-like tail was in truth a mass of endlessly proliferating tentacles. Anyway, this thing was an illustrator's worst nightmare. The monster also displayed a disturbing confusion of identity. She declared herself Lucia, Veldanava, and Ivarage all at once. To resolve that contradiction, she ultimately bestowed a name upon herself, Luvelrage. The moment the name was declared, her appearance didn't change, but her power stabilized and surged overwhelmingly. That alone signaled one thing clearly: Veldanava's soul had been completely assimilated. Facing this utterly fused, hopeless situation, Rimuru asked whether Veldanava could still be separated. Seal answered that the probability wasn't 0, but there was no method available right now. The only conceivable strategy was to defeat Luvelrage, consume her entirely with soul gluttony, then perform a thorough analyze and appraise, and only after that consider further options. At that same moment, the face on Luvelrage's draconic forehead turned toward Remuru and greeted him in an eerie tone. "Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Greetings are important. We'll never meet again." Immediately after, several tentacles lashed out. Their speed, in a stopped world where physical laws no longer applied, reached superluminal levels, surpassing even the constant speed law of Infon. Rimuru felt a chill run through him. As he dealt with the tentacles, a powerful sense of wrongness struck him. The face on the giant beast's forehead vanished. Then, killing intent surged from behind. Luvelrage had separated her core body, turning the fight into a 2-on-1. The humanoid main body stood roughly the same height as Veldanava. She had 4 arms, 2 primary hands wielding swords, and a smaller secondary pair emerging from beneath the arms, forming seals before her abdomen while holding a black and white glowing orb. On her back were 3 pairs of wings: angelic wings, demonic wings, and golden red wings. Her body was encased in an exoskeletal armor layered with dragon scales. Rimuru found himself in the most brutal fight he had ever faced. The giant beast and Luvelrage attacked simultaneously. The beast used endlessly regenerating tentacles for physical harassment and relentless tracking attacks, while Luvelrage herself pressed in with sword techniques and magic. Elegant, efficient, dual-wielding, punctuated with well-timed casts of primitive magic. Rimuru, at least, held the advantage in weaponry. Elpis, infused with the power of 3 true dragons, surpassed Luvelrage's twin blades in raw might. At the same time, Soul Gluttony nullified all projectile-type attacks, including primitive magic. As the battle progressed, Rimuru reached a shocking conclusion. The humanoid Luvelrage was stronger than Veldanava ever was. She wielded all of Veldanava's authorities flawlessly while possessing limitless energy. Even star particles were under her complete control, making her offense nearly perfect. Rimuru realized that unless he blocked with Elpis, any direct hit would mean catastrophic damage, or outright annihilation. This wasn't just an even fight, it was a tightrope walk where a single mistake meant instant game over. And yet, the one handling tactical calculations delivered an unbelievable verdict. Seal stated calmly that there was no problem at all. Direct hits would still only deal minimal damage to Rimuru-sama. Rimuru internally exploded with disbelief. He was convinced Seal had miscalculated. At a moment where the fate of the world was on the line, the usually flawless Seal was somehow dropping the ball. He even started wondering whether the earlier kidnapping incident had left her with lingering after effects, sincerely hoping she would return to normal. Seal sensed Rimuru-sama's inner doubts, and quite unusually sulked. She puffed up in irritation and protested that Rimuru-sama was being terribly rude. Rimuru sighed. Since he still had stamina to spare, he decided to grit his teeth and endure, for now, until Seal's condition stabilized. Just as Remuru resolved to tank it out, Luvelrage, who had been attacking relentlessly, suddenly stopped. She questioned Rimuru directly. Those attacks should have been dodged, yet he had taken them head-on. Luvelrage concluded that Remuru was protecting the people behind him. Remuru was startled. His concern had been exposed. Although Gaia's maximum barrier reduced the impact on the central world, it couldn't completely negate direct physical damage to the ground. To prevent shockwaves from shattering the land, or harming his immobilized allies, Rimuru had deliberately absorbed the attacks, refusing to evade. Luvelrage let out a malicious snicker and precisely highlighted the difference between Rimuru and Guy. Rimuru hated seeing his companions destroyed. If the planet broke apart, they would all die, so Remuru was stubbornly protecting the world itself. This wasn't a question. It was a certainty. Remuru had no choice but to admit it. Fighting while protecting others severely limited his power. Luvelrage displayed a grotesque imbalance, razor-sharp intellect paired with childish, sadistic cruelty. Laughing maniacally, she declared she would destroy everything. Then, without warning, she posed a philosophical question. What does loneliness feel like? Without waiting for an answer, she roared that she herself had been unbearably lonely, and that Remuru must experience it too. Her logic was simple and merciless. Since loneliness had driven her mad, she would kill all of Rimuru's companions and force him to taste that same despair. Before the words had even finished echoing, Luvelrage's colossal beast form began to move. She no longer paid Remuru any attention and instead charged straight toward the ground, unleashing purely physical attacks with tens of thousands of proliferating tentacles. Each tentacle was brutally powerful and razor-sharp. Anything short of creation-class durability simply couldn't withstand them. Even simple trampling by that massive body alone would have been enough to erase everything on the surface. Against this kind of sheer physical mass and momentum, even the supposedly invincible maximum barrier was useless. Watching this hopeless scene unfold, Rimuru realized that if this attack landed, everything would truly be over. Veldanava, at least, had acted with a purpose. But Luvelrage was acting purely for amusement. This kind of misery chain, dragging the entire world down just because one's own existence was unhappy, was something Rimuru absolutely could not tolerate. The idea that one's own misfortune justified harming others was fundamentally wrong. Rimuru thought about the nature of equality. Humans were never equal to begin with. Even if reality worked like a character creation screen where stats could be freely distributed, differences would still remain. It was precisely because of inequality that a perfect world existed only as a fantasy. And because the world was imperfect, it was worth striving to make it better with one's own hands. To destroy everything just because things didn't go one's way was childish beyond measure, an attitude devoid of any empathy. Toward an existence that did nothing but complain about loneliness while refusing to understand others, Rimuru would never compromise. He decided then and there to wager everything he had to deny this existence. Rimuru silently activated his authority and instantly moved to the ice statues protecting his companions, placing himself directly in front of Luvelrage's massive body. Riding the surge of his fury, he swung the divine sword, Elpis. He had intended this attack merely as a deterrent, to draw aggro, since erasing a super-dense energy aggregate like this normally required astronomical power. But the actual result cleaved heaven and earth. The slash transformed into a colossal blade that tore through the sky itself, splitting Luvelrage's 100-meter-long beast avatar cleanly in two. The released energy erupted into void lightning, dimensional rifts connected to foreign realms, and a terrifying space-time storm was born. The storm formed a vortex that swallowed the giant body, crushing and compressing it. Even a physique capable of resisting gravitational collapse had no ability to resist. It was dismantled without mercy. Luvelrage cried out in shock. Rimuru was even more stunned, frozen in place. Seal, however, was utterly calm. She stated matter-of-factly that this outcome was inevitable. That wasn't just the space-time storm. It was the effect of Rimuru-sama's nihilistic blade, a weaponized manifestation of void. Resistance had never been possible. Rimuru hurriedly protested that the power had gone way too far. This was well beyond the scope of a test swing. Seal responded with mild exasperation and explained the reason. Although the true dragons had become true dragon cores, they could still regulate their output. Rimuru himself had used roughly 70%. Velgrind and Velzard had contributed around 30% each. Perfect coordination. The problem was Veldora. He had gone full power. Apparently, Veldora had gotten too excited and floored the accelerator in sync with Rimuru's rage. Faced with his sister's threats and furious scolding, Veldora let out a pitiful scream. Rimuru was speechless, but he also felt a small sense of warmth. The process might have gone off the rails, but the result was undeniably effective. The compressed remains of the beast avatar began a dangerous expansion reaction. Rimuru immediately absorbed everything with soul gluttony, completely erasing Luvelrage's giant beast form from existence. Rimuru believed that this was it, that all that remained was to defeat the humanoid Luvelrage. Victory seemed assured. However, fortune and calamity were twisted together like a rope. Rimuru failed to realize that Luvelrage's malice ran far deeper than he had imagined. The true despair might only have been beginning. Witnessing the destruction of her giant avatar, Luvelrage was consumed entirely by rage. This was the collapse of her sense of omnipotence. She had fused with Veldanava, reclaimed Lucia, become a complete being, and attained what felt like absolute power. And yet, not only had she failed to eliminate the insolent Rimuru, she had suffered the ultimate humiliation of having a part of herself annihilated. Luvelrage realized that fighting with power, short of full seriousness, would never work. The battle had devolved into a mutual cancellation of authorities, a deadlock that could last forever. Although the destroyed avatar was merely a byproduct of leaked energy and could be recreated at will, emotionally it was unforgivable. To vent her rage and shatter the stalemate, Luvelrage chose to attack Rimuru's weakness, to strip away his capacity for rational judgment. Yes, Luvelrage's target was the heroes frozen into ice statues at the edge of the battlefield. To Luvelrage, they were nothing more than toys. To Remuru, they were irreplaceable treasures that had to be protected at all costs. It was the perfect move, both an outlet for her hatred and a way to enrage Remuru. Laughing maniacally, she charged gleefully towards the helpless cluster of ice statues. Remuru panicked, because he had also been monitoring the remnants of Luvelrage's beast body. His reaction lagged by a split second. Even with complete fixation applied by Velzard, it wasn't absolute. If each statue were individually targeted by power of Luvelrage's level, they would eventually fail. In his heart, Rimuru cursed Luvelrage's vile nature. Even after he had fought seriously and head-on, she still lashed out like a tantrum-throwing child, taking revenge on the weak. Milim had noticed Luvelrage's intent and tried to reinforce the defenses, but Luvelrage was simply too fast. Her responses were always half a beat too late. Rimuru made a cold, brutal judgment. Even a direct collision alone could cause catastrophic damage. If the bodies remained intact, resurrection might still have been possible. But if they were blown apart into dust within the stopped world, revival would likely be impossible. Along Luvelrage's path were Gabiru, Geld, Hinata, and farther away, Adelman, Gadra, and others, everyone squarely within the attack zone. As Luvelrage mocked them with "I'll let you experience loneliness," Remuru focused completely, preparing to use instant teleportation and take the hit head-on. But at the very last moment, just before he moved, Rimuru suddenly stopped, because there was no need anymore. Within the frozen world, an anomaly appeared. Directly in Luvelrage's path stood a single figure, just as motionless as the other ice statues. Yet, her posture was different. Her body was lowered, her massive odachi already raised, fully prepared to strike. It was Shion. The instant Luvelrage entered her range, Shion burst from stillness into motion, diving straight into the attack. She mocked Luvelrage as a foolish being and declared that she would deliver divine punishment in Rimuru-sama's stead. This was Shion's ultimate technique, god-slaying, true chaotic fate. If it was truly god-slaying, then even tangled resentment itself could be severed. Shion's blade traced an unpredictable, warped trajectory, cutting straight towards Luvelrage's face. The moment Shion successfully wounded Luvelrage, Seal immediately cried out in awe, proclaiming that Rimuru-sama must have allowed Shion to obtain the authority of godslaying precisely for this moment. The tone was an exact replica of Diablo's worshipful enthusiasm. Remuru internally denied everything at full volume. He had never even heard of such an authority, let alone granted it. This was entirely Shion's own doing. The tactical breakdown was as follows. Rimuru had initially assumed Shion had been knocked unconscious somewhere, but in reality, she had intentionally gone into hiding. The reason she could remain undetected was simple. Within the stopped world, as long as one erased their presence and ceased all movement, they became indistinguishable from the time-frozen heroes. Meanwhile, Luvelrage possessed a critical psychological blind spot. She simply couldn't remember the appearances of lesser beings, and instinctively treated motionless figures as nothing more than obstacles. Of course, this had been an enormous gamble. If Luvelrage had chosen to indiscriminately erase all obstacles, Shion would have been killed instantly. But it was precisely Shion's decisiveness and sheer nerve that allowed her to seize Luvelrage's completely unguarded blind spot. Alright, that's all for this video. To be honest, you probably felt it too. This episode didn't have that many standout highlights. Gaia suddenly upgrading into an existence capable of deploying a barrier that could resist primitive magic felt abrupt. But, well, that was clearly done for plot convenience. After all, when Veldanava previously tried to wipe everyone out with the arrow of flame, Gaia didn't deploy any barrier at all. Why not? I don't know. If we really have to justify it, plot needs. As for Remuru versus Luvelrage, no matter how you look at it, the fight was completely one-sided. What did start to stand out, however, were the philosophical themes. Now that Remuru was effectively the new god, the story began forcing more divine thinking onto him. The problem was that Rimuru himself hadn't really formed a coherent philosophical system, so this god-level reflection felt a bit disjointed. And honestly, this issue is going to become even more obvious in the next episode. Finally, regarding how Shion obtained her ultimate skill, you can revisit episode 115. In short, Seal had been suppressing Shion's skill development because it could potentially harm Rimuru-sama. Shion's power, Lord of Tyranny, inherently possessed God-slaying potential. When Rimuru-sama was exiled to the end of time and space, Seal's seal was lifted, allowing Shion to awaken this ability. But looking back now, was that really the full story? After all, Seal's influence could permeate any time and any place, which means the outcome may have been decided from the very beginning. In our next episode, the battle between Remuru and Luvelrage will enter its final phase. The two will engage in a direct clash of ideals, conflict and coexistence, omniscience and omnipotence. The small dragon, Gaia, will undergo a complete rebirth, evolving into a new true dragon and receiving a name from Rimuru. Remuru himself will also obtain the title of Great Demon Lord, standing above all other demon lords. The next episode will be just as exciting. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support was greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.